In the preliminary investigation report of Air India AI171, some revelations have come to light that have created a new mystery in the world of aviation. Who switched both engines' fuel switches from the run position to cutoff just a few seconds before the crash? When the fuel was cut off and both engines began to choke, one pilot asked, "Why did you cut the fuel off?" To which the other pilot replied, "I didn't." What was the reason that, at such a critical time during takeoff, not one but both engine fuel switches were turned off? Were the switches faulty? Did the pilot do it intentionally, or was it the result of a malfunction? In history, there have been similar accidents where the pilot deliberately committed suicide. What are the similarities between those incidents and AI171? Today, we'll go deep into this issue and try to understand it. Welcome once again to video. Viewers, on the morning of June 12, 2025, it was a routine day at Ahmedabad International Airport. There was light heat in the air, and the sky was absolutely clear. Some aircraft were boarding passengers at the terminal, some were in the taxi phase, while every 5 minutes a plane was either landing or taking off. Amid this crowd, an Air India Boeing 787 Dreamliner stood ready. Tail number VTNB and flight number AI171. This aircraft had arrived from Delhi to Ahmedabad just 2 hours earlier and was now fully ready to fly from Ahmedabad to London. No one knew that within moments, this Dreamliner would make headlines around the world and leave behind a mystery in aviation history. In the cockpit was 56-year-old Captain Sumit Sabharwal with a total flying experience of 15,600 hours, 8,200 of those on the same Boeing 787. The co-pilot, also known as the first officer, was 32-year-old Clive Kunder, who had 3,400 total hours of experience and had flown 1,128 hours on the Boeing 787. According to the report, both pilots passed their breath analyzer tests an hour and a half before the flight and were found perfectly fit to fly. This same aircraft, VTNB, had arrived earlier as Flight AI423 from Delhi to Ahmedabad. During that flight, a small technical issue was detected, which the maintenance engineer fixed through troubleshooting. Now the aircraft was ready for its next journey. There were a total of 230 passengers on Flight AI171. The investigation report mentions that the aircraft was filled with 54,200 kilograms of fuel, and its takeoff weight was 213,400 kilograms, well within the normal range for a Boeing 787. No traces of any dangerous goods were found on board. Everything appeared normal. After boarding, according to ATC recordings, at 1:13 p.m., the aircraft requested pushback and startup clearance from the terminal. At 1:33 p.m. and 45 seconds, ATC instructed the aircraft to line up on runway 23. At that time, the wind speed was 6 knots, about 11 kilometers per hour. The weather was clear, and visibility was recorded at 6,000 meters. In short, everything was perfect for a normal takeoff. After receiving takeoff clearance at 1:37 p.m. and 37 seconds, the pilot pushed the thrust levers forward and the aircraft began to speed up. It's worth noting that the takeoff was being performed by co-pilot Clive Kunder, while Captain Sumit's role was monitoring. According to enhanced airborne flight recorder data, the aircraft reached V1 speed at 1:38 p.m. and 33 seconds. That's 153 knots, or 283 kilometers per hour, beyond which a boarding takeoff is not possible. 2 seconds later, it reached VR speed, 155 knots, and at 1:38 p.m. and 39 seconds, the aircraft took off. Up to this point, everything was normal. Even CCTV footage shows everything appearing fine up to liftoff. But what happened next changed everything. About 3 seconds later, the aircraft reached a speed of 180 knots, meaning the engines were still producing thrust. Then data from the enhanced flight recorder revealed that immediately after, both Engine 1 and Engine 2 fuel cutoff switches were moved, one after the other, just 1 second apart, from run to cutoff position. Fuel supply to the engines was now cut, and their N1 and N2 values started dropping rapidly, meaning engine thrust began to fall sharply. In the cockpit voice recorder, which records all cockpit sounds, a pilot is heard saying, "Why did you cut the fuel switch?" And the other responds, "I didn't." The investigation team has not yet determined which pilot asked the question and which one replied. CCTV footage shows that immediately after liftoff, the ram air turbine, or RAT, deployed. It's an emergency power source that automatically deploys when the engines shut down, providing power to the main electrical systems. Its deployment indicates that something unusual had definitely happened. The footage also shows the aircraft rapidly losing altitude, confirmed by flight recorder data, as both engines' N2 values drop below their minimum idle speed. At 1:39 p.m. and 5 seconds, ATC recordings captured a Mayday distress call. When ATC asked for the call sign, no reply came. ATC then saw the aircraft crash just outside the airport boundary and immediately activated emergency response. The aircraft first hit a chimney of the Army Medical Corps building, about 1,600 meters from runway 23, and then struck the BJ Medical College hostel. The wreckage spread across an area about 1,000 feet long and 400 feet wide. All 12 crew members and 229 passengers lost their lives. 19 people on the ground were also killed. Only one passenger, seated near an emergency exit, miraculously survived. The 15-page preliminary investigation report details everything. From the wreckage, the flap handle assembly was found set at 5 degrees, which is a normal takeoff flap setting, confirmed by the flight data recorder. The landing gear lever was found in the down position. The thrust levers, though badly burnt, were still in the forward position at the time of impact. Most importantly, the fuel control switches were found back in the run position, meaning the pilots had turned them back on before the crash. These fuel switches are designed such that only a human can turn them on or off. They have locking mechanisms on both sides to prevent accidental movement. To operate them, both hands are required, one to push the lock, the other to pull the switch up or down. That's what makes this so puzzling. A single hand cannot turn the switch on or off accidentally. If the pilots didn't switch them off, as heard in the voice recorder, then who did? And if it was an accident, how could both switches turn off, one after another, within 1 second? The report found that both fuel switches were indeed turned off 1 second apart, indicating deliberate human intervention. They were later turned back on, but by then it was too late. According to the report, there was a 10-second gap between fuel cutoff and restoration for Engine 1, and about 14 seconds for Engine 2. Evidence shows both engines had just begun producing thrust again when the crash occurred. Now the biggest mystery, Flight AI171 was perfectly normal up to takeoff. Engines, fuel, everything was fine. Investigators even checked fuel samples from the tanker that refueled AI171. No contamination was found. So if everything was perfect, why were the fuel switches turned off? Or was the locking mechanism faulty? The report mentions another key detail. In 2018, the FAA issued a Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, SAIB, warning of possible disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. That bulletin, based on Boeing 737 operator reports, indicated that the locking feature could potentially fail. This means the risk of lock disengagement had already been known in the aviation industry. The same fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is used across multiple Boeing aircraft models, including the part number 4 TL8373D, the same part installed on Air India's VTMB. 7 years ago, the FAA warned that some switches might have been installed in a disengaged lock condition. Air India skipped this inspection, as it wasn't mandatory, only advisory. But even if we assume the locking mechanism failed and the switches accidentally turned off, how could such coincidence occur that both switches went off one after another within a second? And if the pilot did it intentionally, there could be only one reason: suicide. But was it really suicide? In 2015, the Germanwings Flight 9525 co-pilot locked the cockpit door when the captain went to the bathroom and deliberately crashed the plane into the Alps. Later, it was revealed that he had mental health issues. In 2013, the captain of Mozambique Flight 470 manually set the autopilot altitude to 0 feet when the first officer left the cockpit, confirmed by FDR data as deliberate action. Similarly, in 1999, Egypt Air Flight 990 crashed after religious phrases were heard in the cockpit. Egypt claimed mechanical failure, but the FAA classified it as a suicide mission. And in 1997, Silk Air Flight 185's pilot manually turned off both the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder before putting the aircraft into a dive. Looking at these incidents, one common factor was that the pilot stopped responding to ATC. But in the case of Air India 171, despite what social media says, the evidence so far doesn't point to suicide because the pilots turned the fuel switches back on. If their intention was suicide, and in 1997, Silk Air Flight 185's pilot manually turned off both the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder before putting the aircraft into a dive. Third, the aircraft's nose was seen pitching up just before impact, confirmed by flight data. If it had been deliberate, they wouldn't have kept the elevators in takeoff position. What do you think about this? Tell me in the comments below. Hope you'll like and share this video as always. See you in the next amazing video.